I said yes to a marriage that was nothing more than a transaction, a signature on a page that traded my future for my family's survival. But the true cost, the real demand, wasn't revealed until the door closed on our wedding night, and she spoke the words that redefined everything I thought I had sacrificed. Have you ever stood at the edge of a cliff, not of rock and earth, but of your own life, and felt the ground beneath your feet turn to sand? That precise, breath-stealing moment when you realize the next step isn't a step at all, but a fall into a void you can't see the bottom of? My story doesn't begin with love, or fate, or any of the pretty words they use in movies. It begins in that void. It begins with the sound of a number, a specific, terrifying sum of money, echoing in the silent chamber of my own failure. My name is Liam Sawyer, and at 23 years old, I was a ghost in the city of sunlight, a server in a palace of other people's leisure, and the sole crumbling pillar holding up a world that was determined to collapse. Miami Beach, say the name, and minds conjure technicolor dreams, powder white sand, water in impossible shades of blue, Art Deco facades glowing under a permanent golden hour. For the tourists who flowed through the doors of the Azure Vista Lounge, where I worked, that postcard was a reality. They sipped from crystal glasses. They lounged on velvet couches, discussing market trends and sailing holidays, their laughter a soft melodic currency. For me, and for the other ghosts in black aprons moving silently between the tables, Miami was a machine. A beautiful, humming, brutally efficient machine designed to extract our youth and sweat and time, converting it into the modest stream of digits that appeared in our bank accounts every other Friday. My digits, however, never lingered. They were instantly rerouted, sent north on a digital pilgrimage to a very different reality, far from the salt-kissed air. They went to a small, stubborn town nestled in the misty folds of the Appalachian foothills in Tennessee, to a modest, weary house with a porch that sagged on one side like a tired smile. They went to my mother, Evelyn, a woman whose hands were mapped with lines of hard work and harder worry. They went to my father, Robert, whose once booming voice had been reduced to a fragile whisper by a respiratory illness that was as relentless as it was expensive. And most of all, they went to feed the monster. Not a monster of flesh and bone, but of paper and compounding interest. A debt born from my father's initial medical crisis. A debt that had grown teeth and claws, and an insatiable appetite for our peace. We had borrowed from a private lender in a moment of pure panic, a man with a smile as sharp as the fine print we were too desperate to read. That debt was the true landlord of our lives, and it was threatening eviction from the only home we'd ever known. I had been in Miami for 4 months. The timeline was etched not in memories of sunsets, but in the number of shifts I'd worked, the total of tips I'd scraped together, the count of wire transfers I'd sent. My life was a closed loop, the cramped, damp staff dormitory that smelled of mildew and defeat, the long, hot bus ride to the hotel district, the 10 to 12-hour shift at the lounge, the bus ride back in the dark, a few hours of fitful sleep haunted by numbers, and repeat. I had paused my studies in business administration at a state university in Atlanta, a dream deferred that felt more like a dream demolished with every passing day. The acceptance letter, my father's proud, strong hand clapping my shoulder, my mother's tears of joy, all of it was now an artifact from a different life, a life belonging to a different Liam. This Liam's purpose was singular: earn, send, repeat. exist to offset the despair waiting back home. The Azure Vista Lounge demanded a specific kind of invisibility. You were to be attentive but unnoticed, efficient but never hurried, present but never a presence. I became adept at it. I learned the rhythms of the wealthy, when they wanted conversation, when they wanted silence, which labels on the wine list elicited a nod of approval. I polished silverware until it gleamed under the low lights. I memorized the intricate recipes for cocktails I could never afford to taste. I was a good ghost, and for a long time, the most powerful presence in the lounge seemed to look right through me, as she did everyone else. Her name was Elara Vance. She was the owner, not just of the lounge, but of a scattered portfolio of luxury properties that whispered her name along this coast. The facts about her were sparse, polished by rumor into legend. A widow, originally from somewhere in the Levant, who had arrived decades ago with little and built an empire through a blend of shrewdness and an almost mythical work ethic. She was 58, but to speak of her age felt irrelevant, even foolish. Age implied a timeline, a progression. Elara Vance seemed to exist outside of time, a permanent fixture of her own creation. She was not beautiful in a conventional sense, but she was compelling. Her face was a landscape of experience, sharp cheekbones, discerning eyes that missed nothing, a mouth that rarely smiled but always seemed on the verge of pronouncing a verdict. She wore her wealth quietly in the cut of her clothes, the simplicity of her jewelry, the absolute stillness of her confidence. When she visited the lounge, which was irregular but always unannounced, the atmosphere underwent a subtle but profound shift. The manager's shoulders would tense slightly. The bartenders would suddenly become intensely focused on their garnishes. The low hum of conversation seemed to dip into a more respectful register. She usually occupied a corner table with a view of the ocean, a laptop open, a phone to her ear, speaking in low, commanding tones in either English or fluid, rapid-fire Arabic. She was a vortex of quiet authority, and we all orbited her at a careful distance. My interactions with her were less than minimal, a slight, respectful nod of my head when she passed, a murmured good evening, Ms. Vance. I was part of the furniture, a well-functioning appliance, and that was how I preferred it. Then, the nature of her gaze changed. I first noticed it one afternoon during the lull between lunch and the evening cocktail rush. I was resetting a table with a kind of meticulous care that was born less of pride and more of a need to control the tiny square foot of universe in front of me. I aligned the cutlery with geometric precision, smoothed the linen napkin into a perfect fold. When I looked up, her eyes were on me. Not a passing glance, but a steady, analytical observation. It lasted only a few seconds before she returned to her screen, but the impression lingered, a phantom touch on the back of my neck. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a projection of my own hyper-awareness in a place where I felt perpetually scrutinized. But it happened again and again. While I was patiently explaining the tasting notes of a single origin coffee to a hesitant guest, I saw her watching from her corner, a faint, unreadable curve to her lips. When I stayed late one night to help the kitchen staff reorganize a chaotic walk-in pantry, a task far beyond my job description but one that needed doing, I turned around with a case of tomatoes in my arms to find her standing in the kitchen doorway, silhouetted against the brighter light of the hallway, just observing. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her attention was a spotlight in the dimness of my anonymous existence, and it was both unnerving and, in a strange way, electrifying. My coworkers saw it too. The boss lady has you on her radar, Sawyer Diego, a veteran server, said one day as we polished wine glasses. His tone was light, but his eyes held a hint of wary curiosity. Better be on your best behavior, or maybe your worst, depending on what she's looking for. We all laughed. A nervous, brittle sound. We traded theories. Maybe she was planning to promote me to a supervisor role. Maybe she was looking for a personal assistant. Maybe she was just making sure I wasn't stealing silverware. The simplest, most obvious reason, any kind of personal interest, seemed too absurd to voice. She was Elara Vance. I was Liam Sawyer, interchangeable server number 3. Our worlds were planets in different solar systems. The tension of her unspoken attention became a background hum in my life, a second layer of fatigue over the constant, grinding anxiety about home. I was a wire stretched too tight, vibrating with 2 different frequencies of dread. And then, as wires do when stretched beyond their limit, I snapped. It happened on a Wednesday. The lounge had been unusually busy, a relentless tide of demanding customers that left us all frayed. My feet ached, my lower back was a knot of pure fire, and a headache pulsed behind my eyes with the rhythm of the bland jazz piped through the speakers. Finally, the last customer left. The clean-up ritual began, the clatter of dishes, the gurgle of the industrial dishwasher, the scent of sanitizer cutting through the lingering smells of food and perfume. I was hauling a heavy bag of trash to the rear service alley when my phone, buried in my apron pocket, began to vibrate with a specific, urgent pattern. My mother's ringtone. A cold, liquid fear poured into my stomach. She never called this late. In our family, the hours after 9 p.m. were for quiet, for worrying in silence. A call now was a flare shot into a dark sky, a signal of disaster. I dropped the trash bag and fumbled for the phone, my greasy fingers slipping on the screen. "Mama," I said, pushing through the heavy metal door into the alley. The humid night air, thick with the smell of rotting garbage and salt, hit me like a wall. What came through the speaker wasn't my mother's voice. It was a sound of pure structural failure, the noise a foundation makes when it finally gives way. It was choked, gasping, eroded by sobs so deep they seemed to come from the earth itself. "Liam, oh God, Liam, Mom, breathe, just breathe, tell me." My own voice was a tight wire. The story emerged in fractured, agonizing pieces. My father had been rushed back to the hospital by ambulance earlier that evening. His lungs, the doctor said, were filling. Pneumonia, on top of everything else. He was in the intensive care unit, struggling for every breath. The word ventilator was used. The deposit required to keep him in that level of care was a number so large it felt abstract. A figure from a news article about national debt, not something connected to my father's life. And then, as if the universe were a sadistic playwright, the second act of the tragedy slammed into the first. The debt collector, a man named Riggs with the cold eyes of a taxidermist, had come to the house that very afternoon. No more extensions. No more promises. Full repayment by 10 a.m. the following morning, or he would arrive with the sheriff and a formal notice of foreclosure. He would literally change the locks on the doors of my childhood home with my mother and my teenage brothers inside. The 2 numbers, the hospital deposit and the debt total, swam in my vision, merging into one monstrous, impossible figure. I did the math on autopilot, though I already knew the answer. I had sent home everything I had just 3 days prior. What remained in my account wouldn't cover a single hour of the AQ, let alone a fraction of the debt. The gap between what I had and what was needed wasn't a gap. It was the Grand Canyon, and I was standing on the wrong side holding a piece of string. "I'll get it, Mama," I heard myself say. The voice sounded calm, assured, someone else's voice borrowed for the occasion. "Don't you worry. Don't tell Dad. I'll fix this. I promise." The promise hung in the foul air of the alley after I ended the call. A hollow, stupid, pathetic promise. How? The question screamed inside my skull. I ran through the options with the frantic, illogical speed of pure panic. A bank loan with no collateral, no cosigner, and a minimum wage job? Laughable. The other servers? They were my friends, but they lived 3 missed paychecks from disaster themselves. Pawn something? My worldly assets consisted of a 5-year-old laptop, a pair of decent shoes for work, and my grandfather's wristwatch, which might fetch $50 on a good day. And then, slithering out from the darkest corner of my memory, came the option. A conversation I'd overheard weeks ago, half drunk after a shift, with a busboy named Carlos who fancied himself a player on the city's underbelly. "You ever need real cash, man? Fast cash, I know people. They don't ask questions. But the VIG is serious. You gotta be sure. Loan sharks. The very poison that had created our original monster, just in a more concentrated, violent form. The idea made me physically nauseous. To jump from one drowning pool into another, deeper, darker one? But what was the alternative? Let my father suffocate in a county hospital bed? Let my mother be physically thrown from her home? I sank down onto the filthy pavement, my back against the cool, greasy brick of the building. I put my head in my hands. The despair wasn't a feeling. It was a physical substance, tar-like, filling my lungs, coating my skin. I was 23, and I had failed. All the sacrifice, all the invisible labor, all the pride I'd swallowed, it had all been for nothing. The cliff edge I'd been teetering on had finally crumbled, and I was in the free fall, watching the last lights of the world I was trying to save recede above me. I want you to pause here for a second. Put yourself in those shoes, on that cold pavement. Your entire identity, everything you believed about hard work and endurance, has just evaporated. The people you love most are about to be broken, and you are utterly powerless. What survives in that moment? What is left of Liam Sawyer when the purpose he built for himself is proven to be made of sand? Think about it. What emerges from that kind of ruin? I don't know how long I sat there. Time became meaningless, measured only in the pounding of my heart against my ribs. I might have prayed. I might have cursed. I think I just went blank, a system overloaded, shutting down. The sound that pulled me back wasn't a sound from the alley. It was the soft, precise click of a latch. The heavy metal service door swung inward, casting a rectangle of sterile yellow light across the asphalt, framing me in its glow like a prisoner on a stage. She stood in the doorway. Elara Vance. She held a small white porcelain cup in one hand, steam curling gently into the night air. She wore a cream-colored linen shirt, perfectly pressed, and tailored trousers. She looked as alien in that grimy context as an orchid in a coal mine. Her expression was unreadable, but her dark eyes were fixed on me, taking in every detail, my hunched posture, my face no doubt streaked with grime and the tracks of tears I hadn't felt fall, the utter defeat in my posture. The shame that crashed over me then was hotter and more violent than the despair. This was the final humiliation. To be seen in this state of absolute ruin by the person who represented the pinnacle of control, of success, of everything I was not and would never be. I scrambled to my feet, wiping my face with the rough sleeve of my uniform shirt. "Miss Vance, I'm sorry. I just needed a minute. I'll get back to clean up." The words were automatic, a pathetic attempt to reassemble the facade of the competent employee. "Stay where you are, Liam," she said. Her voice was calm, low, and it carried an authority that froze me in place. It wasn't the sharp tone she used with the manager. This was different. Softer, yet somehow more inescapable. She took a single step over the threshold into the alley, letting the door swing mostly closed behind her. "I have been here for a few minutes. I heard enough." The world didn't just tilt, it inverted. She knew. She knew the sordid, desperate core of my existence. The medical drama, the financial shame, the pathetic temptation of criminal lenders. The last vestige of my privacy, the last scrap of dignity I carried, was gone, laid bare before her. I felt naked, flayed open. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her cup, her gaze never leaving mine. "The men you are considering calling," she began, her tone conversational yet lethal in its precision. "Carlos's associates. I am familiar with their type. They will give you the money, and then they will own you. They will own your hours, your health, and eventually they will come for the family you are trying to save. It is not a solution. It is a slower, more painful form of ruin. How do you know about?" I started, but the question died in my throat. Of course she knew. She was Elara Vance. She saw everything. "I make it my business to know the potential vulnerabilities of my operations," she said, as if reading my mind. "And you, Liam, have been a significant point of my attention for several weeks now." She took another step closer. The faint, elegant scent of her perfume, jasmine and sandalwood, began to displace the alley's stench. "Your work ethic is not a performance. Your punctuality is not fear. Your silence is not ignorance. I have reviewed the security footage from nights you thought you were alone. I have seen you reclean areas the evening crew neglected. I have seen you help dishwashers and busboys with tasks that are not yours, without being asked, without seeking credit. You send 90% of your earnings to a bank account in Tennessee. You live on coffee and cafeteria leftovers." Each statement was a soft, precise tap, hammering the reality of her scrutiny into me. She hadn't just glanced. She had investigated. Profiled me. I wasn't a person to her. I was a data set, and she had been running the analysis. Why? Was the only word I could push out. "Because in 30 years of building what I have built," she said, her voice dropping into a more confidential register, "I have employed, managed, and fired hundreds of men, educated men, connected men, ambitious men. I have yet to find one whose character is not ultimately for sale, whose loyalty is not ultimately to himself. You are different. Your loyalty is to something outside yourself. It is to your family. That kind of fidelity, it is an asset, the most valuable asset in any room, and the hardest to fake." She was talking about me as if I were a rare mineral she'd discovered in one of her properties. The clinical detachment in her praise was chilling. "I can eliminate your problems," she stated, her tone shifting to one of pure business. "As we speak, I can make 2 phone calls. One to the hospital administrator, guaranteeing your father's care and moving him to the best private pulmonary unit in the state. The second to the debt holder, Mr. Riggs. wiring the full principal, and demanding the signed deed returned to your mother by tomorrow afternoon. The mountain crushing your family will be gone before you wake up. The offer was so vast, so astronomically generous, that my mind couldn't process it as real. It was a fairy tale, a hallucination born of exhaustion and despair. My knees felt weak. I don't know what to say. I'll repay you. Every cent. I'll sign anything. I'll work for you for the rest of my life. For free. Just tell me how. The words tumbled out in a desperate, grateful stream. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who has just seen the final piece of a puzzle click into place. I do not want your money, Liam, and I do not need more labor from you. I have an excess of both. She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the unasked question hang in the air between us like a blade. What I require is something else. Something my money cannot easily purchase. Something your particular form of loyalty can provide. She closed the final distance between us. I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the strands of silver woven through her dark hair. Her presence was overwhelming. I require a husband. The sentence didn't parse. The words were English in a logical order, but their meaning refused to coalesce into sense. My brain rejected it. A laugh, dry and hysterical, escaped my throat. "Excuse me? A legal marriage," she clarified, her demeanor utterly unchanged, as if she were outlining a new benefits package. A union recognized by the state. You and I. The reality of it began to seep in, cold and horrifying. This wasn't help. This was a transaction of a different, more profound order. She wasn't saving me. She was acquiring me. The anger came then, sudden and hot, cutting through the shock and the shame. It was a defense mechanism, a last stand for my shattered autonomy. Why? I spat the word. Why on earth would you want that? From me? Look at me. I'm a kid who can't keep his family from drowning. You could have anyone, someone with a name, an education, a fortune of their own, someone who could actually, I trailed off, unable to say the word love in this context. It felt like an obscenity, because the men with names and fortunes and educations, she replied, her voice gaining a sharp, brittle edge, see only a bank balance and a portfolio. They see a challenge to conquer, an empire to merge with. I was married to such a man of immense passion and boundless ambition. Our love was a fire that consumed everything in its path, including ultimately him. He worked himself into an early grave, chasing a horizon that kept receding. I will not be a trophy for another man's ambition. I will not be a stepping stone. She took a breath, composing herself, the mask of the negotiator slipping back into place. I need peace, Liam, not passion. I need companionship, not conquest. I need loyalty, not strategy. You have demonstrated that your loyalty is to a cause greater than yourself. I am offering you a new cause. My cause. Our cause would be a quiet life. Your role would be to stand beside me, to accompany me to the events I can no longer bear to attend alone, to be a presence in a home that has been empty for too long, to listen, to be a friend. In return, your family's security is guaranteed, not as a loan, but as a gift. Your future is reopened. You can return to your studies. I will fund them. You can have a career within my organization, one you earn. She painted the picture with crisp, clean strokes. It was a partnership, a business arrangement with emotional specifications. It was sane, logical, and to my desperate mind, it began to sound almost reasonable. Then She delivered the alternative. "The other path remains open to you," she said, her eyes turning to flint. "You can walk back into that lounge right now. Finish your shift, and tomorrow, call Carlos's friends. See how long it takes before their kindnesses requires a payment you cannot make with money. See if your father is still conscious when the sheriff arrives to put your mother's belongings on the lawn. That is your choice. A partnership with clear terms, or a descent into a different kind of servitude, one that will destroy everything you are trying to save." It was the clinical brutality of that ultimatum that broke me. She had framed my two futures with devastating clarity. On one side, a gilded cage, but with the doors unlocked, a path forward and safety for those I loved. On the other, a descent into a literal hell, debt, slavery, almost certain violence, and the loss of everything. This wasn't about my pride anymore. My pride was a luxury that had died on the pavement. This was a simple, horrific equation. My freedom, my autonomy, my imagined future for a chance at my father's life and my family's home. I looked past her, through the barely open service door, into the pristine, empty lounge. I saw the reflection of the low lights in the dark marble floor. I saw the ghost of myself there, carrying trays, being invisible. That life was over, one way or another. I looked back at her, at Elara Vance, my potential wife, my savior, my buyer. I thought of my father's hand, the skin paper thin over his bones. I thought of my mother's voice, trying so hard to be brave. I thought of the porch light on our sagging porch and the promise I'd made to see it shining again. I closed my eyes. I took a breath that felt like my first and my last as the person I used to be. When I opened them, I met her waiting gaze. "Okay," I whispered, the word tasting of ash and surrender. "I'll do it. I'll marry you." So, I had said yes. A single word that felt less like a commitment and more like a sentence being passed. What happens after you sign away the blueprint of your life? You don't get a moment to mourn the old you. The machinery of a new existence just clicks into gear, and you are pulled along, a passenger in your own story. The transformation was not gradual. It was instantaneous. The morning after the alley, I was not summoned to my shift at the Azure Vista Lounge. Instead, a sleek, black town car so silent it seemed to glide, collected me from the curb outside my staff dormitory. The driver, an impassive man in a dark suit, simply nodded and held the door open. I slid onto leather seats that smelled of wealth and restraint, still wearing my cheap khakis and a threadbare polo shirt. I felt like a stain on the pristine interior. We didn't go to the lounge. We navigated through the waking Miami streets, past the tourist bustle, into the hushed, manicured enclaves of the ultra-wealthy, finally slipping through ornate gates and down a winding driveway shaded by ancient banyan trees. We stopped before a Mediterranean-style villa that looked less like a house and more like a fragment of a calmer, more elegant world that had drifted onto the Florida coast. It was all cream-colored stucco, arched doorways, and terracotta roof tiles. Bougainvillea spilled in violent purple cascades over balconies. The silence here was profound, broken only by the distant sigh of the ocean and the whisper of a breeze through palm fronds. This was not a home. It was a fortress of tranquility, and I was being marched across its drawbridge. I was shown not to a guest room, but to a suite that was larger than my entire dormitory floor. The bathroom had a freestanding stone tub and a shower with more nozzles than a car wash. A wall of glass doors opened onto a private terrace overlooking a glittering infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the Atlantic. On the vast bed, lay 2 garment bags. Inside one was a perfectly fitted navy suit, a crisp white shirt, silk tie. In the other, more casual but impossibly soft clothing. There were no price tags, but their silence screamed of expense. My old clothes, the uniform of Liam the server, were gone, presumably vanished into some charitable ether. I was being stripped and redressed, metaphorically and literally, for my new role. Elara was waiting for me in a sun-drenched atrium filled with orchids. She sat at a glass table, a delicate pot of coffee and a stack of documents before her. She looked rested, in command, the vulnerability of the alley completely erased. She was the CEO again, and this was our first official meeting. "Good morning, Liam," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "I trust you slept. Please, sit. We have details to finalize." The documents were a prenuptial agreement, thicker than any textbook I'd ever owned. It was a map of the new continent I was entering, with all its borders and minefields clearly marked. Her assets, painstakingly listed and valued, remained exclusively hers. I would have no claim, now or ever. In return, I would receive a monthly stipend of a sum that made my eyes blur, enough to live comfortably and send a very generous amount home without ever touching the principle of my own needs. My father's medical care was to be covered by a dedicated health fund she was establishing. My brother's education through college was to be paid from a separate trust. The language was cold, precise, and devastatingly fair. It outlined exactly what I was getting, and more importantly, what I was not. "This is not a purchase," she said, watching me turn the heavy pages. "It is a merger of needs. You provide companionship and loyalty. I provide security and opportunity. The terms are clear to protect us both. My lawyers are on standby if you have questions, but I advise you to read it carefully." I didn't have questions. The contract was a mirror held up to our arrangement, sterile, honest, and devoid of sentiment. I took the heavy pen she offered. The act of signing my name on those pages felt more significant, more binding, than any vow I would later speak. I was signing a reality into existence. The wedding itself was a quiet, administrative affair 2 days later. It took place in the same villa, in a room with a vaulted ceiling and those panoramic ocean views. There was a judge, 2 of Elara's attorneys as witnesses, and a discreet photographer. No family, no friends, no music. My side of the aisle was empty. I wore the suit from the garment bag. She wore a simple but exquisite ivory dress. We exchanged rings, a plain platinum band for me that felt like a handcuff made by a master jeweler. We said the required legal phrases. The judge pronounced us married. The attorneys applauded politely. It was over in 15 minutes. I was now Liam Sawyer Vance, husband. The absence of my family was a physical ache in the room. We had agreed it was better this way, to present them with a fait accompli, a happy, settled marriage, rather than the fraught, desperate negotiation that had led to it. I had called my mother and told a beautifully crafted lie. I said I'd met an incredible, kind woman through work. That we'd connected deeply, surprisingly. That she wanted to help, that she could help, and that we had decided, impulsively and romantically, to get married. I heard the confusion in my mother's silence, then the dawning joy, then the tears. "As long as you're happy, baby. As long as you're happy." The guilt of that lie became a new stone in my gut, right next to the stone of my sacrifice. That first night as a married couple, the tension in me was a live wire. I'd been moved to the master suite, a cavernous, opulent room adjacent to hers. I sat on the edge of a bed so large it felt like a landing strip, still in my suit pants and the new shirt, now wrinkled. My mind was a riot of terrified scenarios. What did companionship mean in the dark, in private? What would she expect now that the legalities were satisfied? I had braced myself for a transaction of a different, more intimate kind, a final surrender of my body to seal the bargain. The silence of the house was oppressive, a waiting thing. The door between her sitting room and the bedroom opened softly. She entered, not in some suggestive lingerie, but in a tailored silk robe, her hair down and damp from a shower. She looked younger, softer, but no less formidable. She didn't come to the bed. She sat in an armchair across from me, tucking her legs beneath her, observing my rigid posture. "You look like a man awaiting an execution, Liam," she said, her voice quiet in the vast room. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the intricate pattern of the rug. "Let me be perfectly clear," she continued, her tone firm but not unkind. "The word husband in this room, between us, does not carry a traditional dictionary of obligations. I did not marry you for that. I have no interest in claiming rights you are not willing to give. This is a shared space. You are my ally, not my possession. I expect your respect and your honesty. I do not expect, nor will I ever demand, anything more from you physically than you are prepared to offer freely. Do you understand?" The relief that washed over me was so profound it left me dizzy. The wire inside me went slack. The execution had been stayed. I managed a nod, finally meeting her eyes. In them I saw not desire, but a profound exhaustion, and a sincerity that disarmed me completely. "Good," she said, a genuine, small smile touching her lips. "Then we can both get some sleep. You take the side you prefer. I promise not to snore." She stood, turned off the main light, leaving only a small lamp glowing on her nightstand, and got into the far side of the bed, leaving a continent of linen between us. I lay there in the dark for hours, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, slow and steady. The monster I had feared, the predatory, lonely widow, had not appeared. In her place was a woman offering a startling, respectful distance. The fear began to melt, replaced by a bewildering sense of safety. For the first night in months, I slept deeply, and without dreams. The following days were a lesson in surreal dislocation. My old rhythms were obliterated. There was no alarm for a dawn shift, no bus to catch, no uniform to don. I woke in a silent palace. I wandered halls adorned with art I didn't understand, through kitchens where staff moved like silent ghosts, preparing meals I didn't order. I was a guest who never had to leave, and the inertia was maddening. My entire identity had been built on doing, on earning, on striving. Now there was nothing to do. I felt useless, a decorative object in a very expensive case. I tried to find purpose. I would offer to help in the kitchen, only to be gently but firmly shooed away. "It's quite all right, Mr. Sawyer Vance. We have it handled." I attempted to tidy already immaculate rooms. A housekeeper would appear, smiling nervously, and take the dustcloth from my hand. My presence in the operational spaces of her life was a disruption. Elara, meanwhile, was a force in motion. She left early for meetings, often before I awoke. She returned late, her heels clicking on the marble floors, her posture still perfect but her eyes holding a deep, familiar fatigue I recognized from my own mirror, the fatigue of carrying a world. She would retreat to her home office, a room of dark wood and soft light, and the glow of her laptop would spill under the door until the small hours. One such night, driven by a mix of my own restlessness and a strange, burgeoning sense of responsibility, I ventured to that door. It was ajar. I peeked in. She was asleep, her head resting on her folded arms on the desk, her glasses skewed. The laptop screen showed a complex spreadsheet, numbers glowing in the dark. The scene was one of utter solitude and exhaustion. This was the reality behind the villa, the suits, the empire. It was a woman running herself into the ground, alone. I didn't think. I stepped inside, moving as quietly as I had between the tables at the lounge. I saved the document on her laptop and powered it down. I found a cashmere throw on a sofa and draped it gently over her shoulders. Then, remembering my mother's remedy for sleepless nights, I went to the kitchen. I boiled water, steeped chamomile and lavender from the herb garden, added a spoon of honey. I carried the steaming mug back and set it on a coaster near her elbow. As I turned to leave, her voice, thick with sleep, stopped me. "Liam, it's late," I said softly, not turning around. "The numbers will still be there tomorrow." A long pause. Then, a sigh that seemed to come from the very core of her. "Thank you." It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a small, human act of care, the kind you'd offer a friend who'd worked too hard. But in the cathedral of that silent, lonely house, it echoed. It became a ritual. I wasn't her employee anymore, and I wasn't yet her friend, but I could be her sentry, the guardian of her rest. I began to wait up, not intrusively, but present. I'd read in the living room, and when I heard her car, I'd put the kettle on. We'd sit in the quiet kitchen, and she would talk, not about business, at first, but about the weight of it, the frustration of partners who saw only profit margins, the loneliness of being the final decision on everything, the hollow feeling of coming back to a house with no one to ask, "How was your day?" I just listened. I didn't offer solutions. I offered validation. That sounds incredibly frustrating, I'd say. Or, you carry so much. It's okay to be tired. It was what she had bought, I supposed. But it didn't feel like a service I was providing. It felt like the natural response to seeing another human being bent under a load. Slowly, the dynamic shifted. The careful, contractual distance began to contract. We started eating dinner together, not always, but often. The conversations moved from her day to other things. Books, a documentary I'd seen, the absurdities of the art world she moved in. She began to ask about my family, my brothers, not as a subject of her charity, but with genuine interest. I saw her smile more, a real smile that reached her eyes. The fierce, untouchable Elara Vance began to recede, and in her place emerged a woman who was simply tired and grateful not to be alone in her fatigue. One afternoon I found her on the terrace, gripping her phone, her jaw tight with anger. She was muttering in Arabic, a lyrical language turned sharp with frustration. "Is everything okay?" I asked, setting down the book I'd been trying to read. "It's the new supplier for the Palm Beach lounge," she snapped. "Not at me, but at the universe. Third time this month. The coffee is wrong. The roast is inconsistent. It's damaging the brand. I'm going to have to fly there and handle it myself, which is an absurd waste of my time," I hesitated. This was her world, her empire. I was an outsider. But I had, quite literally, been on the ground. "Elara, can I say something?" She looked up, surprised out of her anger. "Of course." When I was at the Azure Vista, the last few weeks, I noticed the coffee changed. It became more bitter, acidic. I thought it was a new blend you'd approved, but I saw the delivery guy once. The bags were from the right roastery, but the lot numbers were mixed, old stock with new. The warehouse foreman was new, and he was never checking. He'd just sign the clipboard and wave them through. The problem might not be the supplier. It might be the gatekeeper. She stared at me, her anger dissolving into pure, focused attention. You notice that? I served it every day. You taste the difference when you're the one getting complaints about bitter Americanos. I just never thought it was my place to say anything. She was silent for a long moment, then a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. Liam, that is precisely the kind of insight I never get. I see reports from the warehouse manager about inventory efficiencies. I don't see the taste of the coffee. She picked up her phone, but now with purpose. Thank you. You may have just saved me a great deal of money and a migraine. That small moment was a crack in the wall between our worlds. She began, tentatively, to invite me into the operational side. Not to make decisions, but to sit in on meetings as her ground-level consultant. My perspective, that of the person who actually interacted with the product and the customer, became a new filter for her decisions. When she wanted to fire the negligent warehouse foreman, I suggested training and a new check system instead. If the system is broken, a new person will make the same mistakes, I argued. She listened. She implemented the double check. The problem was solved without firing anyone. It was no longer just a boss and a bought husband. It was becoming a partnership. I was learning from her formidable business acumen, and she was relearning, through me, the human element that got lost in spreadsheets. We were, against all odds, becoming a team. But a team in the privacy of a villa is one thing. A team in the glittering, vicious arena of high society is another. Our next test wasn't in a boardroom or a warehouse. It was in a ballroom, under the glare of 1,000 crystal shards and 100 judgmental eyes. The gilded cage had a social circuit, and it was time for the new acquisition to be presented. How do you think they saw me? The young, handsome nobody on the arm of the formidable Elara Vance? What whispers do you think followed us across that marble floor? The invitation was to a charity gala at one of the most exclusive hotels on the Strip. It was a world of couture gowns, tuxedos that cost more than cars, and jewelry that sparkled with a cold, hard light. The air was thick with perfume and the soft clink of champagne flutes, underpinned by the low murmur of calculated networking. I walked beside Elara, my hand on her arm, in a tuxedo that had been tailored for me that week. I tried to mirror her poise, her unaffected grace, but inside I was a raw nerve. I could feel the eyes. They swept over me like searchlights, scanning, assessing, dismissing. The women's glances were a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled contempt. The men's were worse, a blend of amusement, envy, and outright disdain. The unspoken question hung in the air, almost audible. What's his price? I was not Liam, Elara's husband. I was the boy, the accessory, the gold digger, the toy. I tried to engage in conversations. I was asked what I did. I'm working with Elara in her hospitality group, I'd say. The polite, empty smiles that followed were more insulting than sneers. How lovely, they'd say before turning back to talk to someone real about market volatility. The breaking point came at the bar. I'd stepped away to get Elara a glass of water, needing a moment to breathe. As I waited, I heard them. A trio of women, draped in silk and diamonds, standing just behind me. They made no effort to lower their voices. Aren't they a picture? She always did have exquisite taste. Even in pets. Oh, I hear he was a waiter. Can you imagine? From serving canapes to wearing brioni. He must be pinching himself. I give it a year. Once the novelty wears off and he realizes she's not just a bank account he can charm, he'll be gone. They always are. The heat that shot through me was pure, undiluted fury. My knuckles turned white around the cool glass. Every instinct screamed to turn around, to tell them about the alley, about the hospital, about the debt, to scream that I was there for my family, not for their canapes or brioni suits. But I saw Elara across the room, deep in conversation with a potential investor, a serene smile on her face. A scene would reflect on her. It would make her look foolish for choosing a savage. I swallowed the rage like broken glass, took the water, and walked back to her side. My face a mask of calm. She took the glass, her fingers brushing mine. She looked into my eyes, and hers narrowed slightly. She saw it, the storm behind my placid expression. She said nothing to me, but her hand found mine and gave it a brief, firm squeeze. The message was clear. I know. I'm sorry. Stay with me. We left the gala soon after. In the quiet cocoon of the car, the tension in my shoulders finally began to leak away, replaced by a hollow feeling of shame. You heard them, she stated, looking out the window at the passing lights. It doesn't matter, I lied. It matters to me, she said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. No one speaks of you that way. I thought that was the end of it. A moment of shared understanding in the dark. I was wrong. Elara Vance did not handle insults to her own with quiet resignation. She handled them like a strategist. 2 days later, she announced we were hosting a luncheon at the Azure Vista Lounge. A small gathering of key partners, she said mildly. When I saw the guest list, my blood ran cold. It included the most vocal of the society gossips from the gala, and, most notably, a man named Alistair Thornfield. Thornfield was a legacy fortune, a man in his 70s with a reputation for eviscerating people with a smile and a well-turned phrase. He was a barracuda in a bespoke suit. The lunch was a beautiful, tense affair. The view was stunning, the food impeccable. I sat beside Elara smiling until my face ached. The conversation was light, trivial, until Thornfield, over dessert, dabbed his lips with a napkin and turned his predatory gaze on me. Elara, my dear, we are all so delighted to see you so, vibrantly accompanied. It does wonders for the spirit, but we must confess, among friends, to a certain curiosity. His smile was all teeth. Young Liam here, his background is rather a contrast to this milieu, is it not? I understand he was recently serving in this very establishment. To go from taking orders to giving them is quite a leap. One does hope his intentions are as pure as his complexion. With so much vulnerable capital in your orbit, one must be cautious. The table fell silent. Every eye was on me. This was it, the public trial. I opened my mouth, a defensive, angry retort on my tongue, but I felt Elara's hand clamp down on my thigh under the table. A silent, powerful command, stop. She set her fork down with a quiet, definitive click. She looked at Thornfield, and then slowly let her gaze travel around the table, meeting the eyes of each guest. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alistair, she began, her voice clear, calm, and utterly penetrating. How kind of you to be so concerned for my well-being. Let me ease your mind. I know Liam's intentions with a clarity I have rarely experienced in any boardroom. I chose a man who was serving coffee over a man who serves only his own interest, for a very simple reason. She paused, letting the silence build. Liam is the only person at this table who saw me before he saw my balance sheet. He committed to me knowing it would cost him his pride, to save the people he loves. He honors that commitment every day with a loyalty that is not for sale at any price you could fathom. You wonder what he gets for being here? Let me ask you, what is the value of the peace he brings? What is the market rate for someone who listens without an agenda, who cares without a calculation? There is no figure for that in your portfolios. It is priceless. And if anyone at this table doubts the integrity of my husband, you are, by extension, doubting my judgment after 30 years of building this business. And if my judgment is so flawed, then perhaps we should reconsider our associations altogether. You could have heard a pin drop in the lounge. The sound of the ocean outside was suddenly deafening. Thornfield's face went from smug to ashen. He stammered an apology, a weak backpedaling thing. The gossips studied their plates with sudden, intense fascination. Elara had not just defended me. She had gone to war for me. She had staked her professional reputation, relationships worth millions, on the truth of my character. She had drawn a line in the sand with me on her side, and dared the world to cross it. In the car ride home, I was trembling, but not from fear. From a feeling so vast I had no name for it. You didn't have to do that, I finally said, my voice thick. You risked everything. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw not a hint of the CEO or the strategist, just a woman, fierce and protective. Of course I did, she said simply. You protect me from the silence, Liam. It is my job to protect you from the noise. That is what this is. That is what we are. That night, by the pool under a blanket of stars, the alliance forged in a dirty alley was tempered in public fire and declared unbreakable. We were a team. But teams share secrets, and she had one last devastating secret to share, a truth that would finally make me understand not just why she chose me, but why she needed me. True alliances are forged in fire. The public defense at the lunch had been a baptism by it. I was no longer just her contractual husband. I was her chosen partner, and she had declared it to the world at significant cost. The villa no longer felt like a gilded cage, but like a headquarters. We were a unit. But even the closest units have their hidden histories, their source codes written in pain. I was about to learn hers, and in doing so, finally understand the profound gravity of the transaction I had entered. It was a week after the confrontation with Thornfield. The air was warm and soft, carrying the scent of night blooming jasmine from the garden. We were sitting by the infinity pool, the water a black mirror reflecting the sprawl of stars overhead. The only sounds were the distant, rhythmic sigh of the surf against the cliffs below and the gentle clink of ice in our glasses. The peace was palpable, earned. It was in this quiet that Elara finally let the last wall fall. I told you I had been married before, she began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it, almost swallowed by the night. She wasn't looking at me, but at the horizon where the sea melted into the sky. I told you his ambition was a fire. That was true, but it was also a cowardly simplification. She took a slow breath, as if steeling herself to dive into deep, cold water. His name was Idris. We met at university in London. He was brilliant, fearless, and he saw not just a world to live in, but a world to build. We were partners in every sense, in love, in dream, in work. We started with nothing but an idea, and alone against my family's good name. We built everything you see around you, Liam. Not me. We? Her eyes grew distant, seeing a past projected onto the present night. The work was our religion. We believed that if we just built enough, acquired enough, reached enough, we would find satisfaction, security, a pinnacle from which we could finally rest and look at what we had made. But the pinnacle kept moving. Every closed deal revealed a new, higher peak. We worked 18, 20-hour days. We skipped meals, slept on planes, celebrated victories with a conference call already scheduled for the next morning. We told each other we were building a legacy. We were so young. We thought we were immortal. She fell silent for a long moment. I didn't dare speak, didn't dare move. I just listened, bearing witness. The first time he collapsed, he was 42, she continued, the words coming more slowly now. Each one waited. At a construction site for one of the first villas. Stress, the doctor said. Exhaustion. He prescribed rest. Idris laughed. Rest was for people who hadn't won yet. We had just broken ground. How could he rest? A bitter, sad smile touched her lips. He was back at his desk the next day. I was right beside him. We were a two-person army, and the war was our own lives. She turned to look at me then, and her eyes glistened in the starlight. The second time, there was no warning, no dramatic clutch of the chest. We were in Dubai, closing the deal that would finally, we thought, give us the breathing room we needed. We were in our hotel suite, reviewing contracts. He stood up to get a glass of water, took 2 steps, and simply folded, like a marionette with its strings cut. By the time I reached him, he was gone. A massive coronary event. The doctor later said his heart was like that of an 80-year-old man. It was just used up, emptied. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but her voice remained steady, a monotone of profound grief. He died in my arms on a marble floor in a city of strangers. I was screaming for help, but I was screaming at him, begging him to open his eyes, to finish his sentence, to just be there. The ambition, the fire, the legacy, it all evaporated in that instant. It left me with this. She gestured vaguely at the villa, the grounds, the unseen empire. And with a silence so complete, I thought it would drive me mad. I had built my entire adult life around a partnership, and in a heartbeat I was alone in its hollow monument. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold. She gripped mine back, her fingers tight. After the mourning period, she whispered, the men came, the suitors. They were bankers, heirs, entrepreneurs. They brought flowers and investment proposals. They complimented my strength, my acumen. But their eyes were the same as Idris's had become in those last years. They held that hungry spark, that calculation. They didn't see a widow. They saw a thriving company, a valuable network, a lucrative merger. I was not a person to be loved. I was an asset to be acquired. I would have rather drowned in the silence than let one of them near me. She turned fully to me now, her gaze intense, searching my face. And then, there you were, at the lounge. I saw you work with a focus that wasn't about climbing, but about enduring. I saw you send your money away and live on nothing, not to invest in a future stock, but to preserve a past, a family. I saw you clean a spill, not for a manager's praise, but because the floor needed to be clean. You had the dedication Idris had, but none of the fever. You knew how to sacrifice for love, but you also knew, instinctively, where the line was. The line where sacrifice becomes self-destruction. Her next words landed in my soul with the weight of a revelation. Liam, I didn't just hire you to be my companion. I hired you to be my conscience. To be the voice that says, it's enough. Stop. Rest. To do for me what I was too blind, too driven to do for Idris. Every time you turn off my laptop, every time you bring me that tea, you are saving me from the path that killed him. You are giving me a second chance at having a life, not just a legacy. You are not repaying a debt. You are preventing one. The understanding was a physical blow, leaving me breathless. I wasn't a bought husband. I was a guardian, a lifeguard posted at the edge of her own relentless drive. My role wasn't to adore her, but to anchor her. In saving my family, I had been recruited to save her from the ghost of hers. Thank you, I said, my voice rough with emotion, for trusting me with that. For trusting me with you. She nodded, the ghost of a smile returning. The trust, she said, goes both ways, and it's time to complete the circle. It's time to go home. My heart stuttered. Home? To Tennessee. To your family. Our marriage cannot exist only in this bubble, in legal documents and defended lunches. It has to breathe in the air that made you. I need to see it. They need to see me. Not as a benefactor, but as your wife. The terror returned, different now. Not fear of her, but fear for her. Fear of the dissonance. Elara, it's not like here. The house is small. It's old. The bathroom is rustic. The road is dirt. There's no staff. She laughed, a real warm sound. Liam, I grew up in a village with no running water. I have negotiated contracts in factories where people slept on cots. I am not a porcelain doll. I am going to meet my family. We will drive. We will stay in your house. No hotels, no separations. Her determination was absolute. She packed a simple suitcase, linen trousers, cotton shirts, flat shoes. She asked me to teach her a few phrases of the local Appalachian dialect, practicing "thank you kindly" and "pleased to meet you" with a hilarious, earnest clumsiness that made my heart ache. She wasn't preparing for a safari. She was preparing for a pilgrimage. The drive felt like traveling back in time, through layers of my own life. The dense tropical green gave way to rolling hills, then to the familiar worn blue majesty of the mountains. With every mile, my anxiety coiled tighter. I was bringing a universe of wealth and power into a world of patched jeans and quiet struggle. I feared her hidden disgust, my family's awkwardness, the unbridgeable gap between her reality and theirs. We turned on to the final rutted dirt road, the old oak tree with the tire swing, the rusted mailbox. And there, on the porch of the small, white clapboard house, was my whole world. My mother, wiping her hands on her apron, again and again. My father, leaning on his cane but standing tall, his color better than I'd seen in years. My two younger brothers, shifting from foot to foot, trying to look nonchalant and failing utterly. I stopped the car. Before I could even unbuckle, Elara was out. She didn't pause to survey the peeling paint or the overgrown yard. She walked straight up the path, a sincere smile on her face. She went first to my mother, took both of her work-worn hands in her own, and bent her head in a gesture of respect. Then, in her carefully practiced, terribly accented twang, she said, "Thank you kindly for having me." My mother's face dissolved, not into tears of pity or shame, but into an explosion of joy and relief. She pulled Elara into a fierce, welcoming hug. "Oh, honey, Welcome home." She did the same with my father, shaking his free hand gently. She high-fived my bewildered brothers. She refused the good room, insisting on my old childhood bedroom with its sagging bed and poster of a mountain landscape still on the wall. She sat on the worn floral sofa and ate my mother's beef stew from a chipped bowl, declaring it the best she'd ever tasted. She helped wash the dishes, laughing when she fumbled with the old faucet. She listened to my brother's rambling stories about school and football with genuine interest. The climax came the next afternoon. We were all in the backyard under the shade of the big sugar maple. My mother, her face etched with a lifetime of gentle hardship, brought out 2 tin cups of sweet tea, the kind we always drank. She handed one to Elara, her eyes downcast. "I'm right sorry, Elara. We ain't got no fine china like you're used to. Just these old things." Elara took the cup. She held it in both hands, feeling the humble metal, the dent in its side. She looked from the cup to my mother's anxious face, and then she took a long, slow sip. When she lowered the cup, her eyes were bright. "Evelyn," she said, my mother's name sounding like a sacred word in her mouth, "this is the most delicious tea I have ever been given, because it comes from your hands, and from this land and from your heart. No porcelain in the world could make it taste more like home." I watched my mother's posture change. The slight, perpetual hunch of apology straightened. A pride, long buried under worry, shone in her eyes. At that moment, under the dappled Tennessee sun, I saw the final, beautiful truth of Elara Vance. She wasn't a woman who valued luxury. She was a woman who valued essence. The essence of loyalty in a desperate boy. The essence of peace for a weary soul. The essence of welcome in a dented tin cup. And in that moment, with my father chuckling at something my brother said, with my mother glowing, with Elara sitting cross-legged on the grass like she belonged there, a massive, quiet truth settled over me. I was free. The debts were gone. The house was safe. My family was whole, and they were smiling. The contract had been fulfilled on her end 100 times over. If I wanted to, I could leave. I could ask for an annulment, take my stipend, go back to school on my own, start my life again. The chains were off. The thought should have been liberating. Instead, it felt like a threat. The idea of walking away from this woman, from this shared life we were painstakingly building, from the quiet understanding in her eyes when I brought her tea, from the fierce protectiveness she had shown me, it caused a pain so sharp and deep it stole my breath. I didn't want to leave. I loved her. It wasn't a thunderclap. It was the quiet, undeniable sum total of everything. I loved her strength and her vulnerability. I loved the brilliant strategist and the woman who butchered Appalachian greetings. I loved the way she defended me and the way she needed me to remind her to sleep. I loved her for seeing value in a tin cup and in a broken boy. This love had not been part of the deal. It was an unauthorized, glorious, overwhelming dividend. On our last evening, we walked down to the creek at the edge of the property. The fireflies were just beginning their dance in the purple dusk. I stopped walking and turned to her. "Elara," I said, my voice steady with a certainty I'd never felt before. When I said yes in that alley, I was giving up my life. I see now I wasn't giving it up. I was trading it for a better one, not because of the houses or the money, because of you. I don't regret a single second of this strange, beautiful deal. Thank you for saving my family, and thank you even more, for letting me save a part of you." She looked up at me, and in the fading light, I saw her eyes fill, not with the grief of the past, but with the profound relief of being truly, fully seen. She didn't say "I love you" either. She didn't need to. She reached up, placed her hand on my cheek, and nodded, a world of understanding passing between us. "Come on, husband," she said softly. "Let's go home." And I knew she meant both homes, the one in the mountains and the one by the sea. They were both ours now. Isn't it strange where we find the things we're not even looking for? I went searching for a lifeline for my family and stumbled into the purpose of my own life. Have you ever experienced something like that? A moment of desperation that accidentally led you to exactly where you were supposed to be? The return to Miami was a homecoming in every sense. The villa was no longer her house, it was our home. I resumed my business degree through an online program, but now my classroom was also her office. I learned theory from textbooks and practice from her, a master class in management, negotiation, and, most importantly, in knowing when to stop. I began taking on real responsibilities. First, small logistical tasks, then managing the supply chain for the lounges, using the ground-level knowledge I'd always had. I earned the respect of the staff not as the boss's husband, but as the guy who knew how many ounces of espresso went into a perfect macchiato and could also streamline a vendor contract. One day, a massive development proposal landed on her desk, a multi-hotel complex in Central America. The profit projections were astronomical. The partners were chomping at the bit. The old light, the hungry spark, flickered in Elara's eyes for just a second as she reviewed it. It would mean 2 years of brutal travel, constant stress, a return to the old war rhythm. She pushed the proposal across the desk to me. "What do you think?" I studied the numbers. They were impressive. I thought of Idris. I looked at her, at the new softness around her eyes, the peace she carried now like a prized possession. "The numbers are perfect," I said, "but it will cost you your peace. It will cost us our evenings by the pool. It will cost you years of the life you've finally started to live. Is another number in a bank account worth more than that?" She held my gaze for a long, quiet minute. Then she picked up the proposal, walked to the shredder, and fed it in. The mechanical whir was the sound of a demon being exorcised. She came back, sat on the edge of the desk, and took my hand. "No," she said simply, "it is not." That was the final proof. Our marriage had changed her destiny as surely as it had changed mine. Now, I often stand in the warehouse of the Azure Vista Lounge, reviewing inventory manifests. Sometimes, I pause by the back door, the one that leads to the alley. I remember the cold pavement, the smell of garbage, the sound of my own shattered hopes. I thought I was signing up for a life of quiet shame, a permanent reminder of what I'd sold. I was wrong. I had signed up for my future. I had stumbled into a love story that was better than any fairy tale because it was real, forged in sacrifice and mutual salvation. The boy who married for money found a wealth that could never be quantified, and the woman who bought a husband found the partner who taught her how to truly live. I didn't sell my future that night. I traded a lonely struggle for a shared peace and found a love written in the quiet spaces between survival and grace. And as for what she asked of me on our wedding night, she asked for nothing but my presence. She asked for a friend in the dark. And in the end, that was the one thing I was most grateful to give. They called me a gold digger. They never saw that the real treasure wasn't in her bank vault, but in the quiet way she said, "It's enough. Let's go home." This story, my story, is a testament to the unexpected turns life takes. If it resonated with you, if you believe in second chances and love that arrives in disguise, do me a kindness. Like this video. Subscribe to Jackson Stories. Your support helps me share more tales of lives transformed in the most surprising ways. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what in this story spoke to you. I read every single one. And now, the journey continues. 2 more incredible stories are on your screen right now. Choose your next adventure, and I'll see you there.